All right, we're going to do all of Branwen tonight in one shot, and next time we're going to do all of Manawydan in one shot, and then we'll have 2 hits on math. I'm going to do it that way because math is just filled with important material. This is the second branch then of the Mabinogi called Branwen. And unlike Pwyll, which was the story of a single hero who acted always alone on his own, in Branwen we have a family, almost like a family unit. The family group are called the Children of Lyr, L-L-Y-R, and it's not clear whether Lyr is the father or the mother. It's the men who are chauvinists that would like to say, well, since they had the title of Children of Lyr, it must have been Lyr must have been the father. But since the Welsh were matriarchal, it's more likely that the children were children of a woman named Lyr. Lyr really means children of the sea, because Lyr in the Celtic mythology of England and Ireland, or Britain and Ireland is the proper way of saying it, they were called the children of the sea, and since Bran was a giant, this could even relate to them being descendants of Atlanteans, because there's a lot in early British mythology talking about giants and giants that come from the islands to the west. It could also mean that the idea of Robert Graves, it could have meant the Pasagians that came across the sea from England, or it could mean the Tuatha De Danann who came from Egypt. But at any rate, Bran is the oldest, and he is king. He is a giant, and his proportions seem to change during the course of the story. Like when he's angry, they make him out to be bigger, and at other times he's not quite so big. But he was so big that they never had a house built for him because there wasn't a house large enough to hold him. Manawydan is his brother, and a full brother, a very wise man, and a magician of some note, who we're going to talk about the next time. The whole next Mabinogi is dedicated to him. And Branwen, after whom the Mabinogi is named, was his full sister. And then there are 2 half-brothers. Their mother slept with someone else, and the result of that union was the twins Nisien and Evnisien. And the 2 brothers are complete opposites of each other. Nisien is loving and kind and will do anything for anyone or everyone, and because of that he brings people together who are very opposite of each other. Evnisien, on the other hand, is an agitator, and he's an agitator of strife and discord. He's something like a male Eris in Greek mythology. If I'm not mistaken, Evnisien means something like without love or without kindness or something like that. Anyway, it's a very symbolic pair of twins. So the whole family is holding court on the west coast in Hardlich, and they're sitting on Hardlich Rock looking over the sea in the direction of Ireland. And as they're sitting there, they see 13 ships coming from the south of Ireland. They dispatch messengers, and they find out that the ships belong to the king of Ireland named Malalwich. I'm not Mangly, he's too bad. And they learn through messengers. I don't know why kings do that, but they speak to each other more through messengers. It's almost certain to guarantee misunderstanding. But Malalwich has come seeking in marriage the hand of Branwen. And Branwen is the most beautiful woman in the world. And Malalwich says he wants to strengthen the bonds of affection between the two nations. So they have a council, the whole family, or just about the whole family. It turns out that Evnisian is off somewhere. He tends to disappear and I guess go to make trouble in other places. And it is decided that Branwen, at where the river Aberfraw comes into the sea, that there will be a marriage there. And so they start a feast. And the first night, Branwen sleeps with Malalwich. And the next day, they set up quarters for Malalwich and his whole company, the 13 ships worth. They set it up right near the river, and because it's going to be a long feast. And as the feast is going on, one day Evnisian is making his way back to the rest of the family, and he finds this camp. And he says, what's this camp doing here? And who are they? And he was told that they were the Irish, and that their king was marrying Branwen. And he immediately takes insult. It doesn't take much to insult him. And he gets terribly angry, and so what he does is he takes his sword, and he cuts the lips off of all of the horses, and then he cuts the ears off, then he cuts the tails off, and as many as he can get close to, he cuts the eyelids off of them. And then he goes on back to the court. And Malalwich's men come to him and tell him what's happened, and he takes insult at this, not surprisingly. And he's terribly shook up about it, and he's about to leave. And about this time, Bran, who was called Bran the Blessed, hears of it all, and he hears of the insult, and he tells them he's insulted as well by his own brother. And they try to make peace, again using messengers, and Malalwich, probably who was not a strong person, maybe just because he's in a foreign land, when you're in a weakened position, there's always the tendency to think that this was plotted all along. And he tells Bran, I think you had this in mind all along to insult me. And Bran said, no, why would I give you my sister if it was intended as an insult? And so he mollifies him some, but he has to give presents. And first of all, he has to replace every maimed horse with a good horse. And then, one by one, each one of the followers of Malalwich is given a rod of silver that is as thick as his little finger. And each one is given a plate that is as round as their face is. The plates are made of gold and the rods are made of silver. And he offers this, and Malalwich takes it because he realizes he would be shamed if he didn't. This is a thing with diplomacy. You're locked in. It's not like an individual working as a free agent where you can just come and go as you want. If you represent a state and an offer of one kind or another is made, or if an insult of one kind or another is made, you're in a fix, and there are certain things you have to do, like it or not. So he takes it, and they go back to feasting to celebrate the marriage. But Malalwich is kind of quiet and sullen, and Bran realizes that he has to sweeten the pot. And so he sweetens the pot by throwing the pot in. And it turns out that he has this cauldron must be a huge cauldron, because the property of the cauldron is that if a warrior is slain in battle, you fire up the cauldron and you throw the dead warriors in, and the next day they come out as revived, just like new. The only difference is that they can't speak. So in effect, you have, with the cauldron, you have an army that is immortal. So he's satisfied at that. And he wants to know where Malolwich got this cauldron, where Bran got this cauldron. And he said he got it from a couple from Ireland named Lasar Leis Gingwid and Comidai Comainvol. And they had told Bran that they had escaped an iron house that was designed to kill them in Ireland. And so Bran asks Malolwich whether he knows anything of them. And so Malolwich says, yes, I know all about them. And so he proceeds to tell their story. He says he is out hunting at one time, and he's on the top of this hill or this ridge or rise or something like that overlooks the Lake of the Cauldron. And while he's up there, he sees this huge man coming out of the cauldron, out of the Lake of the Cauldron, and the man has this huge cauldron on his back, and he comes crawling out of the lake. After that, behind him comes his wife, who is twice his size. So they're something in the order of a giant. And they're both yellow-haired. And they greet each other, and the man tells him that his wife is pregnant, and that in a month and a fortnight she will deliver a child, and that child will be born a fully armed warrior. And it isn't directly mentioned, but it is implied that she does this regularly on a periodic basis, that she gets pregnant and delivers fully armed warriors. So Malolwich thinks to himself, wow, I've got a great army here if I just take this person in. So he takes them home, and he settles them, because he wants to have an endless supply of warriors, which means he'd be a very powerful man. However, it turns out that the offspring are troublemakers. They steal and they harass people and they commit all kinds of outrages. And the people come to Malolwich and they complain, and the complaints get more and more and more. And so he has to convene a council of the elders, and the elders get together and they decide that these people have to be done away with, and they're evil. So what they do is they get all of the blacksmiths, and they build this iron house that'll hold the whole family. And when it's built around, they cover it over almost with charcoal. And then they line up all these bellows, and they lure the family in by offering them food and drink, and they keep serving them as much as they can eat, and they keep on giving them more and more and more to drink. And when they're sure that they're all intoxicated to the point of passing out, they seal the house, and they light the fire and start blowing on the bellows. And pretty soon the iron house is white hot and threatened with extinction. What happens is Lasar takes a run, and he bashes against the wall of the house and makes a hole just big enough for he and his wife in the cauldron to get out, and they do, and the rest of the family is killed inside the iron house. And so they go to Britain with the cauldron. And then Bran continues the story, and he says that they came to him, and he aided them, And it was a totally different story, as if they had turned over a new leaf, because wherever he puts them up, the place gets fortified with warriors and new arms, and the areas prosper. And so that's when they're done telling the story, Malolwich says he's ready to go home, and he and the whole company pack into the 13 ships and go back to Ireland. When they get there, Branwen has brought with her all kinds of rich gifts, jewels and gold and things like that, which she gives away liberally, and so she's extremely well received. In the course of the first year, she bears a son named Gwern, Gwern. And as the second year comes around, the Irish begin to hear stories about the horse incident. And they take great insult at it, and they take it all personally. And they again come to their king, and they complain and complain like, how can he have a woman of that family that insulted our people? And so they prevail on Malolwich, who doesn't seem to be too strong of a man, and he casts her out of the house, and she has to go to work in the scullery. And in the scullery, there's a mean butcher who strikes her at least once every day. And all so that the people of Britain, the island of the mighty, so that they don't find out about it, everybody is, all contact with Britain is closed off in order to keep this all secret. But eventually Branwen finds a way to get around all of this. There are two versions of the story. In one version of the story, she catches a starling or befriends a starling and attaches a message on its wing and sends it back across the channel. In the other version, she teaches the starling to speak, and she teaches it to recite what her plight is. But in any case, the starling gets brought to Bran, and he is immediately enraged, and he raises a huge, huge army, which includes Pryderi, the son of Pwyll that we talked about last time. And when Bran has got this whole army put together, he leaves behind 7 elders and his son, Caradog. He leaves him behind to take care of the island. And they all go in boats, except for Bran, because Bran is too big to fit into a boat. And so he goes wading across the channel to Ireland. He's tall enough that he can do that. So one day, Malolwich's swineherds are down near the sea, and they're looking, and they see this forest on the water, and they don't know what's going on. And then they see this mountain, and this mountain has a ridge on it, and on either side there's something like a boiling lake. And so they go back and report this all to Malolwich, and he summons Branwen and says, "What is this?" And she says, "The forest is the masts of the army that my brother has assembled to disassemble you." You know, like he's found out what you're up to, and you're in for it now. He's mad. The mountain is him. That's his head. And the lakes on either side of the ridge are his eyes. So he's huge. And they say, "Oh, you're really gonna get it now." So Malolwich, when the troops see this armada coming at them, they decide that they need the stronghold, and so they burn everything, including the bridge behind them, and they feel they're on the safe side. And Bran and his whole army land, and they come to the river, and there's no way to get across. So Bran lays himself down as a bridge, and the whole army goes over the river on top of him. And when he arises on the other side, the messengers of Malolwich are there, because this bought them some time, and they could see that they were in deep doo-doo, so they worked out a plan. And they tell Bran that Malaldwich is going to step down as King of Ireland, and that Wern, the nephew of Bran, is going to rule, and that Branwen is going to be treated royally and perhaps be something like the regent until Wern grows up that he can rule for himself. And they bargain back and forth. And it's hard to convince Bran because he's normally a very peaceful man, but when he's stirred up, he really wants to go at it, and he wants to have Ireland all to his own, so he wants to rule it himself. And Branwen, who now loves Ireland as much as she loves the island of the mighty, she convinces Malaldwich. She says, we've got to flatter him. She says, you've got to build a huge, tall house that he can get in. And since he's never been in a house before, he'll be flattered to be there, and he'll be more willing to settle the peace. Malaldwich does this, but he's treacherous. And on each of the 100 pillars that hold the roof up, he hangs a leather bag, which is a provisions bag. But in each bag, he's got a fully armed warrior in there, so that even though everybody's going to come in not to fight, he's got warriors there he's going to ambush. So the two companies start coming to the house from opposite directions, and Evnessian runs ahead, and he runs into the house, and he begins to inspect. And he comes to each bag, and he says, what's in here? And he's told that these are provisions of flour. And so he puts his hand in the bag, and he finds a head. He goes until he sees eyes, and he presses the eyes back into the brain. And he goes from bag to bag to bag until he has killed all 100 warriors. And so the Irish can't do anything about it because, there'll never be any peace if their treachery is found out. And Evnessian is looking for trouble, but so he doesn't say anything either. And so they're seated, and they bargain the peace, and Bran is indeed flattered by the great building. And they settle a peace arrangement, and Wern is brought in, and he's brought to Bran, who loves him because he's a beautiful kid. And he loves him, and he passes him to Manawyddan. The kid's getting passed around all over until Evnessian says, why doesn't he come to me? So Bran tells him, go visit your uncle Evnessian. What Evnessian does, as soon as he gets the kid, he picks him up and he throws him into the fire. He's killed instantly. And now there's nothing. There's no common bond for the peace. And Bran jumps up and cries out, dogs of Gwern, beware of pierced thigh, which is another name for Bran the Blessed, is pierced thigh. And that's a declaration of war, and the war starts. And Bran grabs Branwen right away and puts her behind his shield, and they start fighting, and the war breaks out. At first, Bran's army is successful. They're starting to decimate the enemy. There are losses, as there always are. And then Malaldwich's people fire up the cauldron. And eventually, Bran's army is dwindling because they're having to fight what are basically specters that are coming back and that can't be killed because they're brought back to life every night when they're thrown back into the pot. And so his army is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, fighting these mute specters. What happens is Evnessian recognizes his full responsibility and the degree of his enmity, his folly, his anger. And what he does is he goes into the Irish camp and he lays himself among the dead, and they throw him in the pot. And when he gets in the pot, he stretches himself way out, and with the last burst of strength that he has, he bursts both his heart and the cauldron by shattering the cauldron. And what eventually happens is that the men of the Island of the Mighty win the war, but only 7 remain. Pryderi, Manawydan, Gwyneuth, Taliesin, oh boy, Nog, Gridju, and Helion. And in the last battle, Bran is wounded. A spear strikes him in the foot, and it's a poisoned spear. And as he's dying, he says, cut off my head and take it with you, and take it to Whitehill in London, and face it toward the continent. And as long as my head is there, or the skull is there facing the continent, there will be no plagues on the Island of the Mighty. It will be safe. And then, as he's dying, he has a swan song, and in his swan song, he prophesies, and he tells them, you're going to be 7 years at Hardlich with the birds of Rhiannon singing to you, and you will have my head as your good company. After that, you'll go to Gwales, and in Gwales, you'll spend 80 years. And you'll be in a great hall that has 3 doors. One door will not be open, and it'll be the door that faces the Channel of Bristol. And across that, you can see Cornwall. And he says, you are not to open that door, because as long as you keep the door closed, the head will stay alive, and you'll have good company, and you'll be able to go on. However, once the door is open, you have to go immediately and bury the head. And now you have to go across the sea. And so what do? His own brother, Manawydan, has to go and cut his head off and take the head with him. So, interesting story. I don't know how people come up with these things, but it's just amazing what people do in stories. The imagination, wow. So they eventually arrive at the river Aber Allah on an island called Tal Ebolion, which is right near the coast of the Island of the Mighty. And Branwen, at this point, who is with the 7 who survive, looks at the 2 islands that she loves and the 2 islands that she has destroyed and all the things that she loved the most. And she said she feels like, wow, these 2 great lands have all been destroyed on my account. Women are like that. They take the pains and the sufferings on. They take the blame for everything. And when she does this, she expires, and she never quite makes it back to the Island of the Mighty. So they set off for Hardlich, and they meet people of the Island of the Mighty who tell them that the 7 elders that were left in charge were killed by Caswallon. And Caswallon had put on one of the druidic cloaks that made him invisible, and all that could be seen was his sword, and he went and he killed all 7 of them. And Caradog was so grieved at seeing these 7 people that he loved so much that he died of a broken heart. And that Caswallon, who is a cousin to Bran, now rules the island. So they find the hall that they're supposed to go to at Hardlich, and they sit there and they feast, and the 3 birds of Rhiannon sing to them and sing to them as they fly over the sea. Yeah, I believe each of the birds is a different color, and I didn't note the colors. And a very remarkable phenomenon happens is that as the birds are singing to them, they have long vision, so they can see them as if they were close right up, and as if they can be right out over the sea themselves. And after 7 years, they leave. They take the head and they go down to Gwales, and sure enough, there's a great hall there with 3 doors, 2 open and 1 closed. And for 80 years, they have a splendid time feasting, and the head is prophesying to them, probably singing the Druidic poetry. And one day Hylian says, "Shame on my beard if I do not open this door to see if what is said about it is true." And he walks over and he opens the door, and sure enough, all they can see is the Bristol Channel and Cornwall. But immediately a flood of memory comes on each of them, such that every ill that they or someone they have ever known suffers, they can feel. They remember each and every pain that everyone has gone through, and they're filled with sorrow, and they become very restless, and they feel they can't rest until they have buried the head. And so they bury the head. And according to tradition, there are no plagues to England until it is ripped out later on by a king who wants to show how puissant he is. And the 7 go their own ways. In Ireland, all of the males have been killed. Only 5 women who are pregnant are alive in Ireland. And at the same moment, on the same day, they all give birth to a son. And when the sons grow up, they divide the island into equal parts, and they each rule, which is why to this day that Ireland is called the Island of the Fifths, which in our time means something much different. Irish whiskey is in 4/5 of a quart, which is called a fifth. So, this is going to be mostly, the story is almost all it tonight. I have almost nothing to say, I guess. It's a very different story. No interaction with the realm of the dead, and not a whole lot that's supernatural. Instead, we have some classical themes. If we look at it carefully, we have a miniature Iliad and a miniature Odyssey. Magical interludes following on a trip following the war after it's all over. And we also have a study in groups or group formations, sort of in some ways almost an archetypal group formation. Probably not the most perfect representation, but as a group they represent distinct elements of a common unity. The most common group that we know of are the planets. Mercury indicating mind, and Venus indicating love, and the Sun indicating central selfhood, and Mars indicating energy, and the Moon indicating nurture, and Jupiter indicating expansion or generosity, and Saturn concentration or small-mindedness or things like that. But this is a group of 5. And groups are necessary, as we saw a long time ago when we saw the body of Osiris cut up. As things come into material manifestation and a lot of energy is spent just in sustaining material existence, something, in order for progress to go on, the different qualities of the spirit have to be worked out through specialization. So group theory, from a spiritual point of view, like in the part of the planets, is a study in specialization that makes for a whole. where each part in the whole fulfills what it is supposed to do and works harmoniously to an end. Common things that we know of groups. Notes are groups. And notes put together form melodies, or they form chords for harmonies. And we can see how distinct elements work toward a whole. Probably the best group that we know of that functions so marvelously are the organs of our body. Each organ has a quality and a character all of its own, and each contributes something to the economy of the whole body, and each works in systems, and all of the systems into one organism. Groups of 5, as we're speaking of here, are the most ancient groups that we know of. Perhaps triads or trinities are even more ancient, but in terms of the history of human development, groups of 5 are very common. There are a lot in early music, such as Chinese music or Native American music. There are a lot of pentatonic scales where you have 5 notes. They come way before you have diatonic music, where you have a group of 7 and an octave, or before you have 12, where you put the 5 and 7 together. The Chinese were very successful. They had their entire system was based on 5 elements. In the same way that we have 4 elements, fire, water, earth, and air, they had 5 elements. Fire, wood, water, metal. What's the other? What? Yeah, earth, yes. Yes, earth. How could I forget the neutral middle? And their 5 elements were based on the 5 planets. And the polarities of the elements were based on the moon and sun, yin and yang. And so their whole system incorporated both 5 and 2-4-7, but they had a whole elemental system that was quite satisfactory for it. They had a whole healing system, a whole predictive system. They had government divided into 5s, and this was before our modern setup where we have 4 elements and 3 attributes. The children of Lear do not quite perfectly fit this group, but they do represent something of astrological natures and functions. Bran is sort of a Sun-Jupiter figure. In the first place, he's solar in that he is central and royal and the ultimate determination of all things. And he's Jupiterian because he's very generous and he's very positive and very beloved. Manawyddan, his brother, is a Mercury-Neptune figure. He's the thinker. He's the brains behind the throne. He's the one that Bran always comes to for counsel, and he thinks all sorts of things out. But he's also Neptunian in that he knows all of the magic, as we're going to find out the next time around. Branwen is a Venus-Moon figure. She's beautiful. She is, in the same way that Bran is blessed, Branwen is beloved. You cannot look at her without loving her and caring for her. And she is the glue of the group, as love tends to be. It's that which causes us to coalesce and hold together. And she's also the lubricant. To some extent, she is lunar, in that she is a great nurturer, and she easily gives herself to motherhood and to even working in the scullery if she has to. She's probably Blessed in both senses because she is the matriarch. It is her child that will succeed Bran and not Bran's child. Evnisian is a standard Saturn-Mars kind of person. He tries to block everything, tries to hold everything back. It's right down to fundamentals, but he throws a monkey wrench into everything. And he's martial in that he loves strife and he loves warfare, and he just takes pride all the time. Nisian, on the other hand, is something like an Uranus-Jupiter person in that he's inventive and he's unbelievably altruistic. He is more than a love peacemaker. He's sort of an altruist that actually gets into the spirit of other people and is able to bring them together. No one dislikes him. Even his twin brother, Evnisian, who can't get along with anybody else, gets along with him. It's because he understands. He's willing to crawl inside the soul of Evnisian. And he's Jupiterian in that he's always a positive figure. Now, though they're not a pentatonic standard, you can see that they all balance each other out. And there's a whole there. And there's something positive. We won't go into groups as far as looking at the maximum size or the minimum size or whether they're odd number groups or even number groups. We can mention things like odd number groups are accomplishing groups because the oddness gives them an unequality which allows them to be more assertive, whereas even number groups are groups that are much more static and they hold together better because there is a homeostasis within them. We could go into all of that, and I suppose we could go into spiritual chemistry, or we could go into spiritual numerology and look at things like that. But it's sufficient to understand that any time there is a collection of people, people will even come out of their own character in order to fulfill the needs of a formation. A group is a formation that's based on a divine pattern. And if you have 3 people, those 3 people will take a relationship toward each other that has the character of Trinity. The same with 4, 5, 7, or whatever the group is. It's interesting to note that, we're past March Madness time, and it's April Fool, but the children of Lear would probably make a very good basketball team. Because they all, you see what I'm trying to say? I like basketball, and if you know what a basketball team is made up of, it's, you have to have your big pivot in the center, and then you have your terminator, your power forward, and then you have the small forward. Each one has a function, and getting what is called the right emotional chemistry in a team, where you not only have the formation, but where each person's character is like the role that they play. This produces a team that you put one other person in of equal ability, that the team falls apart because the character of that person doesn't fit into the pattern, and the person is acting too much out of character to fulfill the pattern, and it becomes weakened. So it's a very interesting thing. I can now watch basketball games and say that I'm studying for group theory. It's not clear whether Bran is human or divine or somewhere in between. This is something that Celtic mythology is quite common in Celtic mythology, that the gods and humans are not, they're sort of blend into each other. Probably is because clairvoyance was quite common. It's even present to this day in the Scots as second sight. Yeah. The Irish get blind drunk and see things. For them it was really a very blurred thing because they saw humans as divines, and it was all mixed together. And it could also be because they had a very keen awareness of the islands of the blessed. And the islands of the blessed were the islands of the Atlanteans. And the same myths that the Greeks had of the Titans living in western lands where Saturn is buried in a cave or Cronus is buried in a cave, they had those same things in their mythology. Flow and direction of flow is a very important element of this story. If we're facing west, we're going into the prevailing westerlies. It is like facing the future. It is like accepting whatever new is coming. Facing to the east is like accepting what was predicted before, but it's like accepting the past as it is destined to come into the future. Two totally different attitudes. Facing east is looking back, looking at the past, and expecting something out of the past to be reborn and carry you into the future. Fortunately, this story is set up perfectly in that we're all facing west except me. And that means everybody is facing directly into the future and is setting themselves into such a position so that they are looking forward, anticipating. Now, when the group is sitting on Hardlick, facing west, this is a sign not only of a complete group, but of a healthy group. Their anticipation. His proposal is significant in that it is not only a move for peace, but it indicates that Bran is his sister's offspring will then be the king of Britain. And that can't be, to have somebody from Ireland to be the king of Britain. And there is then the possibility that he could enthrone his own son, which was a taboo except in special cases. So this was a very political thing. Ireland and Britain were always rivals for spiritual power and political power. Whenever there were battles among kings in Ireland, they would go to get druids from England they'd bring in ringers from the outside to fight for them in magical battles. And they have recorded battles of druids actually having aerial warfare. That is, that they had devices, just like the people from South America who had gold round shields, and they used the gold to transduce energy out of the ethers, which Orium means that, the light out of the ethers, and with that they were able to levitate themselves. The Druids did things like that, and they had aerial warfare, and if you lost, you really lost, because the Druid magician who had the most power knocked the other one out of the air, and that was it. You were up high enough that you died. But interesting. At any rate, Ireland and England were always rivals, and the opportunity for there to be a peace was a very significant peace. We talked earlier when we were sitting out in front about the Lier Fall. Some people even claim that Stonehenge was brought from Ireland to England. That's a little bit of a thing, especially since they can find quarries a couple hundred miles off where the stones were most likely quarried. It's a bit of a stretch. But at any rate, it would be a political union because that would mean that the two islands were tied together. Political unions have been always things to produce peace, but you cannot, by law or by politics, produce peace. You can only produce peace by love and by living within yourself without needing more and more outside of yourself. So it isn't uncommon that political wars came up. Horses, astrologically, spiritually, and in their very natures, represented pride. So Evnesian's affront was a terrible affront because the horse, what do we say? He was on his high horse. It represented the pride of someone where they rose above the earth. And a rider and the rider's horse became as one. And to have that maimed is a terrible, terrible act of pride. And you wonder, it comes back to first causes, why would somebody like Evnessian want to do this? The logic that Evnessian would always say, he would give a Saturnine Mars logic. He said, I want to prove that this is all true. I want to see if these people really do love us. So I'll put them to the test. But it's an interesting thing, psychologically, to determine which comes first. Is a person nasty because they're ostracized and separated from others? Or do they become separated from others because they're nasty? And it's a cycle that keeps going on and on and on. In any case, Bran realizes that he is his brother. He just can't do away with him. And this is the beginning of what culminates in the act of Evnessian in the war. You have to be included. And if you are included, you recognize that you are part of everyone else. You are part of the whole with everyone else, and that there's a responsibility to that. And the inclusion, where Bran does not punish Evnessian, but includes him in the family, is a very positive thing. The face-saving gifts by Bran, representing silver and gold, represent the union of both the masculine and feminine forces, and they become binding agencies. And in a way, they also become agencies to get into someone else's, they're inlets into someone else's domain. Magically, if you give someone a gift and they accept it, you then have that as a seed in their state where you can use that to enter in when you're out of your body or to do your magic or whatever else. The cauldron turns out to be something that much more than meets the eye. It's more than just much more than just an object. They're externals. The cauldron, the gold, silver, the horses are all externals. None of them can make peace. The story of Lasar and Committee illustrates this very notion about peace. They are very primitive. They come out of a lake, meaning that they represent something that is beneath the surface. They represent something that's coming out of the unconscious or the subconscious or something like that. Being kept in the unconscious or the subconscious, they are undeveloped or not developed the way things are in the consciousness. And to the consciousness, which always tries to make things look pretty and to save face and to look good in all circumstances, they look very primitive and unruly and savage. And they're probably the more so that way because we won't admit to those things in ourselves. And we turn basic energies or simple negation, instead of a tool to serve us, we turn it into something that is negative. And it takes on what we give to it, and it becomes something negative. But as long as we do that, it's impossible to transform them. Repression only intensifies. And so they come back out, and they come back out with a vengeance. Now, if we don't recognize this something as part of ourselves, we see it as an evil spirit. And evil spirits among the Celts, all varieties of Celts, were treated with iron because it was thought that evil spirits couldn't stand to be around iron. I think it has something to do with the magnetic property of iron and the ability to project energy to it, which would be a threatening thing to an evil spirit. It would not be able to stand up to that. The treatment of Branwen by Malolwich is also a very telling thing. The petty pride and the strength of his throne can only come if the people really love him, and if he's strong and loving in his own being. If he does that, he is rendered into a new person. Love is what is fresh and what makes us new. Love is what takes the martial, the iron spirits, and transforms them into objects of beauty, objects of love. So the rejection of Branwen is basically a rejection of love because he doesn't want to appear weak before his people. And in doing that, he in fact does become weak. And the truth always has to come out, and so it's not surprising that the truth gets back to England. Thoughts go through the air like birds. You can't keep a thought hidden. You can't keep a truth. You can't keep reality from being known. Eventually, we clear ourselves, and the truth comes to the surface. When it does, the swineherds are looking east, and they see their destiny coming back to them. What they have sown is coming back. It can't be escaped. An interesting little side story is that if Bran was a giant, say maybe 30-some feet tall, as the Atlanteans were supposed to be, he probably could have waded the channel at that time, because the channel used to be much more shallow than it is now. In fact, parts of England, southwest England, southwest Wales, used to extend much further out to areas that are now under the ocean. And there were even, this is in post-Christian times, that land has sunk, and there are several villages that went underground. I don't know that I believe all the stories that surround them. There's a lot of mythical stories. They claim that if there's really a rough sea and you put your ear under the water, you can hear the bells of the churches from those villages still ringing. I don't know if I believe that, but it used to be shallow, and that there's been a submergence of land in that part of the sea. I don't know if it was in Cornwall also or just in southwest Wales. Do you know much about that? Not a part of British history that you wanted to delve into. Bran also seals his own destiny. This is a really strong destiny story. Everybody gets exactly what they get, and they get it because as soon as they give into their weakness, as soon as there's the possibility of having your son rule England and having your nephew rule Ireland, as soon as he gives into that, is self-seeking, instead of being the all-generous Bran the Blessed, he seals his own destiny. As long as he's generous, everything goes fine. When he's self-sacrificing, when he lays himself down as a bridge, everything goes dandy. But when he succumbs and says, boy, it would be nice to have a house, and it'd be nice to have a house in my honor, that is when once he doesn't take nature as it comes, but has to have something artificial, when he has to have a controlled environment, he becomes weakened and he becomes insecure. He's no longer accepting, and that weakens him. The character of Evnisian is in all of this is also very true. His Saturnian foresight and his carefulness and his skepticism saves the day when he pokes all the eyes out or pokes them into the brains of the Irish. It may not be pretty, it may not be nice, but he's fundamental. He gets right down to the basics, as Saturn always does. Even when he throws Wern into the fire, he is not allowing someone to be a prize, allowing a mere child to be the basis of a peace. He would say, I'm going to test and see whether these people really do love each other or not. And when he throws it into the flame, Bran doesn't get angry with him, he gets angry with the Irish. And shows what he does is, in his honesty, he shows what was there all along in the heart of all things. And he would probably say, war is all right. It's like St. Paul says, we have to fight the good fight. And he probably believes that this is the good fight. And this thesis is borne out by his own final action. He is true to himself. He takes responsibility for everything, such that he realizes that he has to undo what he has done, even if it means sacrificing his own life in breaking the cauldron. That's really fundamental. The last planet that you get to on the ladder of the stars before you can enter the realm of gods is Saturn. You have to get beyond destiny, and when you give yourself to destiny so that you accept the consequence of your own deeds, even if it means your own death, then you're ready to become immortal and ready to go beyond it. We can't just transcend sin, or we can't transcend evil. They have to be transformed, and that means that we have to live it out. Bran, who has accepted flattery, is poisoned. He's struck in his heel, but his head lives on. Branwen, living on love, on seeing the objects of her love destroyed, she can no longer live, because her love has not been fruitful in holding things together. And for this reason, she doesn't quite get home. All right. We've looked at fundamental little things. Now let's look at the main theme, and we're going to have a little tiny excursus in here. We might be a little long tonight. Maybe not too long. Maybe about 100 minutes or something like that. The whole story is an allegory. There is the cauldron of immortality in the depths. Immortality means divinity, and divinity means creativity. So it is a cauldron of creativity. The keepers of the cauldron produce a fully clad warrior every month or every 5 weeks. This also goes back to Athena coming out of either the thigh of Zeus or out of the head of Zeus. And she's born as a warrior. She's born whole. 13 ships make the round trip across the channel. And Branwen doesn't quite make it home. All of those things point to an allegory. And the allegory is dual. When the kettle is in Ireland, its possessors are evil. When it is in Britain, where they're treated open-handedly, the possessors of the cauldron become good. When Branwen and the cauldron go back to Ireland, it is again a time of failing, of strife. All Ireland in this whole story is seen as a very ugly place because all these bad things happen there. So we have the theme that we've been talking about all along. We have a bride that goes back and forth as in Pwyll, and in this case we have a cauldron that goes back and forth. Each year there are 13 lunations, or 13 lunar cycles in a solar year. That is, a solar year, as we've been looking in Welsh mythology, represents a cycle of realization. Within that, there are 13 lunar cycles. During each of these lunar cycles, esotericists claim that a germ from the spirit enters us, and that it passes down the spine and it gets to the sacrum, the sacred area at the base of the spine. There, in that area of the body, is one of the spiritual creative centers. There, the germ that has come down the spine is vivified. It is brought to life. And then, depending on how much we can, by our positive creative consciousness, we draw it back up the spine with waking consciousness until, if we are enough in self-control, if we live lives of full creativity, and that germ and all the light that goes with it that has been vivified at one creative center, when it enters the larynx and on into the skull, it becomes vivified as a creative power. It all depends on our character. If we have fought the good fight, and if we have transformed the nasty things into benign, beneficial, into good things, then we can bring it into the cranium. We can bring that energy right in there. If we live chaste lives, since this energy is all tied up with the creative spiritual fire, which in us, in humans, is associated with procreation, if we spend that energy selfishly, competitively, or indulgently, the first sin, the sin of Adam, we saw was the sin of sexuality, and that spawned the sin of violence at the lower cauldron, the cauldron that we keep things very subconsciously, keep them repressed. So if we live chaste, loving, creative lives, the regeneration can take place. And then the other half of the creative energy, provided that we have developed the imaginative receptivity, where we invite the divine into ourselves, and we make ourselves a vessel so that the Spirit can enter in when the flow comes from the other creative end and meets the spear of light that enters through the top of the cranium in what could be called the Grail cup. The spear, as we remember from the Grail, drips the blood of Christ. I don't know how to say it, but there is a truth that is a living elixir of light. And as that drops into us, intuition by intuition, it's a very holy and awesome thing. Clearly, what this is, the story of Branwen going with the cauldron, or going to the cauldron to one place and not quite making it back home, is the story of that attempt, that trial, the hope of consummating the Grail. In the Grail story, in the Sangreal, when Galahad actually does consummate that grail, he can only live a short while and he dies. He's an immortal. There's nothing left for him to do as a mortal anymore. He has risen. Branwen didn't quite make it, so there is no complete consummation. But the skull of Bran does live on, and it lives on in glorious fashion, so something has been accomplished. This is not a complete story of redemption, but there's something has been accomplished. The group of 5 is now translated into a group of 7. And the group of 7, raised to a higher level, are ready for new teaching. So now it's time for have a little story. The story of Caradwen. Caradwen was a witch or a goddess, depending on which side of the religious fence you were on. And she wasn't a complete goddess or a complete witch, and she had a son who was ugly, very ugly. And she, because she wasn't complete, didn't know a potion to make him beautiful. So if they aren't good looking, they got to be smart, right? And she does know a potion to make him wise. It's like in one of my favorite movies. You ever heard the movie, the book, The Horse's Mouth? And there's an old movie with Alec Guinness in it. And there's this barmaid in there. They took one look at my face as I was growing up, and they said, "She belongs in religion." So Caradwen did know the potion for making her son wise. So she prepared this cauldron called the Cauldron of Inspiration. And it was to boil for a year and a day. And at different times, different herbs were supposed to be put into the mix. However, for some of the herbs, she had to travel far and wide. So, as she was traveling far and wide, she had this neighbor kid, Gwion, G-W-I-O-N, Gwion. She had him tend the fire. And toward the end of the year, getting very close to the end, she's out looking for herbs, and the pot starts boiling ferociously, and 3 drops come off of the pot, and they land on his finger. And he licks them off of his finger, and as soon as he did, he had more than mortal knowledge and more than mortal power. He was sort of like a god almost. And he knew that these 3 drops being taken out of the pot had spoiled it. And he also knew that he couldn't mollify Caradwen. And he knew he was in deep doo-doo. And he figured out that she was going to kill him anyway, because it was supposed to be done all in secret. So about then, she's coming back with the herbs, and so he cuts out of there, and she chases him. And now he's got the power. So he turns himself into a hare and starts running along, and she turns herself into a hound. And she's starting to catch up to him. So he jumps in the water and turns himself into a salmon, the salmon of wisdom. And he's swimming away, and she turns herself into an otter. And he says, well, I can't do it on earth. I can't do it on water. I've got to try air. So he turns himself into a little bird, and he goes flying off, and she turns herself into a chicken hawk to go after him. And she's just as she's catching him, he figures, there's nothing I can do. I got to try and make myself obscure. So he turns himself into a grain of wheat. And when he turns himself into a grain of wheat, she being the goddess, being more powerful than even he is with his 3 drops of wisdom, she turns herself into a black chicken, and she eats the grain of wheat. And she turns herself back into a human, but then she's pregnant. And after her time, she delivers him, and he's so beautiful that she can't destroy him. So she takes him, throws him in the sea, and eventually Elphin, the nephew of Maelgwyn, who is the king of Gwynedd, which is northern Wales, finds him, and he brings him home. But being the nephew of the king of Gwynedd, he's in jeopardy, because being the nephew, he's the heir. And so uncle takes him and locks him in the castle and is going to kill him. And the now young child, who is given the name Taliesin, which means shining brow, shining with wisdom. This is the Taliesin that told all those beautiful stories going all the way back to Atlantis and Lemuria and had enchanted the whole court of King Arthur. He challenges all of the bards of Maelgwyn to a contest. And he says, if I win, I want Elphin freed. And what he does is he casts a spell on all of the other bards, so that instead of being able to say poetry, all they can do is go beep, 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 beep. And he, in the meantime, gives the famous poem that Robert Graves loves so much and that I'm becoming fascinated with, the famous riddling poem, I was so-and-so. He recounts all of his lives, all of the past lives of Taliesin, and put together they point to the way to become initiated into the mysteries. So we've had the little side story. I just couldn't help but to throw it in there because I'm never going to get a chance to come back to Welsh mythology or maybe any mythology again. And Taliesin is just too beautiful. I like him. He's a much more beautiful character than Merlin is. Back on topic. In the great work in which we fight the good war and in which we try to redeem that which is lost and that which has gone into the cauldron and has become immortalized as evil thoughts. It seems like bad thoughts are never going to end. They're all vivified in that cauldron and never going to get beyond it. Many are called and few succeed. The war, of course, is an inner war, and it is a war that we struggle toward enlightenment in. The war is never really won. What happens is everything is included and everything is accepted and it is transformed. The real magic and the real poetry is not the changing of the world outside. It's the changing of what's in us so that we become decent people. And so it means that we find ourselves fighting specters. If we look at most of our thoughts, most of our bad thoughts, there's nothing to them. They're almost like worries. Most of our worries don't have anything to do with reality. It's only when we can redeem them from the cauldron that they can take on a new life. It's possible that the 7 that remain are the 7 archetypal thoughts. You know, there are 7 deadly sins and 7 virtues. And it's like saying, you know, it's like the Hydra. You know, there are all of those heads to cut off, but only one head is the one that counts. And maybe if we get it down to 7 basic sins, like Hershey's and Snickers and M&M's. If we get it down to that, and Madeline and Joyce and, you know what I'm trying to say. If we reduce things to the 7 basic things and we redeem them, that's enough. That's got it all. If we can follow the essential things, get right to the core. In that, there's no better quote than the quote from Carlos Castaneda's Don Juan. He says, there are many paths out there, but only follow the paths that have heart. And that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to get to the heart of all matters and being able to follow that to the end. Anyway, it's not clear that the success in our story is complete, but it's complete enough so that there is esoteric training. The esoteric training, there is, remember the statue that was gold, and then silver, and then bronze, then iron, and then lead, and then the ankles were clay, and it was sand at the bottom, and it started falling apart, that they represented the descent of the spirit into matter from the golden age to the silver, and it went through all of the elements until it was separate elements of sand, the separate individuated personalities, and then the redemption goes back the other way. We're talking about, in Branwen, we're talking about the king, the hero, the sun figure, the initiate, and at one end, the end where the sand is, he's poisoned. He's dying. By the way, the Druids did things. They had a cure that was considered superstitious. That if people were struck with poison spears or poison arrows or poison darts, you know what they did? They put them in baths of milk, and they came out completely healed. And it works for most organic poisons made from plants or animals. Most organic poisons, milk is an antidote. I even read of an incident of somebody in Zimbabwe who was driving a Jeep and something wasn't working right. He threw open the hood of the Jeep and there was a spitting cobra. And this cobra got him right in the eyes. And he would have died within minutes if there hadn't been a nursing mother going by. And immediately she started dripping milk into his eyes, and it was the antidote. And he lost vision for a few weeks, and it was blurry, but if that hadn't been done in that moment, that would have been it for him. And so milk for organic, do you know this from your area? From here? But we might have a discovery here. The universal antidote. But at any rate, he is poisoned. He has taken on the world. He's taken it in through his feet, and he's been poisoned. However, the head, the spherical part of him that has the spherical globes in it, the spiritual part, is alive. And so that now he is, he has a power that's capable of saving the whole world. This indicates that he has gone far enough that his consciousness is raised into his head. He is just the opposite of somebody who has a stroke. People who have a stroke are in their head in the wrong way. I witnessed an incident of that in the last few years. A friend, his mother was an accountant for a very large firm in the state here. And she had a stroke, but she lived. But instead of being mental, as she had always been mental, she became sort of a giggly, certainly not bright like she was before, but she had more peace in the last 2 or 3 years of her life when she was living in her body and not in her head than she had for all of the rest of her life. Bran is just the opposite. But it's not a forced thing, like if you had Guillain-Barré syndrome or something like that, that would force his attention into his head just to make him learn to be peaceful and think. He has gotten that way by living the life that he has lived. And so he represents then the head that can prophesy. We know those things from Renaissance paintings, where they had the little heads with wings flying around. And we know from esotericism that when we die, that our desire bodies, our emotional vehicles, take the shape of our physical as the physical gets built into it. And gradually, through the lower desire world and the higher desire world, as more and more is assimilated into the spirit, the body disintegrates until only it is a head. In second heaven, it is a head. Second heaven, where clearly, at the Mount of Ascension, Peter, James, and John could see the past lives. And they could see by the direction of Christ that Moses was indeed Elias. I believe it's in the 15th chapter of Matthew. But this kind of consciousness where the mind is still capable of specific thoughts, of words in the region of concrete thought, that head is singing out wisdom. And it is the seven who are with that head, first in, what's Carl? I forget the name. Yeah, all right, not important. And later in Wales, they are in something like the Mount of Ascension. So they're being taught, they're being illumined. So it is the story then of an illumined sphere. I don't know anything about 80-year cycles. I do know that the Platonists loved 81, and they thought that was the ideal age to live to, because that was 9 nines. They did everything enneatically, and they thought 9 nines was the ideal. And I don't know about 87-year cycles, which would be what they were all together. But the point about it all is that great teachers are not their lineage. They're not their tradition. All great teachers are God-taught. They're taught from the divine that is within them. And that's really what this story is. It is about being taught from within. The spirit, the intuitive power in the cranium, is working through and speaking to the voices. First, it speaks through the birds of Rhiannon, 3 birds of Rhiannon, and birds have always been symbols of intuitive thought. This is interesting. This would say that there are 3 types of intuition, which would go along with the second hall, that 2 doors are open, because right now we have the Uranian intuition and the Neptunian intuition, but apparently there is a yet more direct kind of intuition that we will gain at a later time. That door hasn't been opened yet. But the 3 birds of Rhiannon then represent the intuition that when we can get peaceful, after the war has been won and things have been reduced to the ultimate, the simplest group, the group of 7, then through those different voices or through those different ears, we can begin our intuitive kind of experience. The even longer period at Wales, it's the skull that's doing all of the talking. And they're getting direct experience right from the fountainhead. No longer intuitive experience. There is something of a union with the divine. Then we have the statement, "Shame on my beard if I do not open this door to see if what about it is true." And that brings us right back to the whole notion that we had in the story of Koepsel. The singularity of the stroke was that he had learned singularity from the material world. In this case, it's a matter of try the spirits. You don't believe the prophecies, you try them. And if they're really true, they should be able to stand any test, any trial. They should be able to be brought into the material world and to see if they really work. And so the door is thrown open. And immediately, what makes them restless is an awareness of all the suffering that is in the world, all the suffering that they've known in their own lives and in those around them. And it says, all right, we've got to get out into the world. We have to test. We have to use this knowledge. And so they bury the head and they set out each on their different way. They go out and fulfill their charge, and they do what they have to do. We have to serve. 2 of them bond together. Pryderi and Manawydan bond together. And next time we'll talk about them in the third branch of the Mabinogi called Manawydan or Manawydan. That's about it for Bran 1. Questions? Comments? Tomatoes? Easter eggs?
So is it going to get more and more mobile?
No. It's going to get more and more magic. The violence. Yeah. Manawydan will probably have a really short talk. I don't think I could get an hour and a half out of Manawydan if I tried, and I don't want to. I try to go by the flow of the story, but there's more than 2 hits worth in the last one. It's really a great story.
Yeah.
Yes, math it's one of the best magic.
Do you suppose the people who hear these stories know what they need?
In their soul, they do. Yes.
You think so?
Even if they can't consciously comprehend them, they hear them and it sinks in. I'm doing all that study on right brain, left brain stuff now, trying to teach myself to draw. And the rational mind that has more of a flow in the left hemisphere would say no, but it will admit pictures. And the pictures go in whole. And when the left hemisphere of the brain is quieted, the whole story and all of the images that are in it come out freely. And it's surprising what is in there. So if your question is, do they self-consciously know in the same way that we know that 2 plus 2 is 4? Probably not.
Just in the sense of not as 2 and 2 plus 4, but what's the point of the whole story that way?
I think so. I think a human being stripped of the pretenses of adulthood gets fascinated with the story, and it can even have violence in. And it knows there's something in there. And I think almost every human being can be sucked into a story, and the deeper the story, no matter how weird it may seem, and no matter how far-fetched it may seem, the more people are caught up into it. And even though they don't know what it means, they say, that's fascinating. And they're caught.
Yeah, what's fascinating is that Brahman married that guy.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why I think you'll enjoy the fictionalized versions that I went.
I don't think I'll read those.
No, because they bring a very strong feminine element to it. That I think that would be redemption. Though I did order a special book for you today. The last book of Carlos Castaneda. He passed on.
Yeah.
A little over. Yes, they have printed the last one. I don't know if it's complete or anything, but I'll probably have it here next week.
Where did you hear about that?
Oh, I don't know. I think the Birds of Ryan sang it.